This is what they wrote to me. They said, "You will see that the suggestion that the full calendar of events, in inverted commas, such that the stadium will be used nearly every day is a little overstating reality. There are 37 days of sport. This assumes that the heads of agreement signed by Cricket Tasmania translates to a contract. However, those events are already played here at Bellarive, so they will not be new, they will simply be at a new venue. But at best, sport will account for 3 days per month. If we look at the other events, it's difficult to see an age of prosperity, in inverted commas, sparked by the stadium. There are 40 conferences of 400 plus people. And we have to remember, Mr President, we can already accommodate that size conference in our state. We can't accommodate conferences up to 1,500. I think 1,100 is the highest we can go currently. So any conferences above 1,100 will certainly be new, but those smaller conferences are likely to be transferred. I'll come back to the quoting from my piece of correspondence. It goes on to say, It is large and expensive to operate, let alone build and maintain structure for such events. And there are many places that can already accommodate such events with no build or maintenance costs. The majority of use, 260 bookings, are corporate dinners and private functions. One might question whether no such dinners and functions presently occur, and more importantly, why a 23,000-seat stadium is needed to accommodate such events, with presumably a few hundred at most in attendance. What the projections by the stadium proponent, the minority government, do, however, is illustrate that what the TPC members stated to you. The precinct, aka a stadium, as there is little room for anything else, will be a largely empty place for much of the time. And it is difficult to see how 260 business lunches and private functions will stimulate growth. Most of them presently occur, and if held at a stadium, they will simply draw income from existing venues. This is especially so when the interest bill on borrowings without repaying capital will be the $50 to $70 million per year, and also at the cost of our beautiful heritage harbour, which will no longer be a draw card." End of quote. Mr President, I concur with everything that community member says. It is a farce to suggest that this annual calendar of events is something to celebrate or to point to as a sign of success. Rather, it looks to be quite a picture of failure already writ large. And I do wonder about the other current Hobart businesses who might be impacted by the events, the smaller events and celebrations that might be pulled away from where they currently are held into this government-run, government-owned entity. Mr President, one of the things I've found most disturbing about the public debate around this project is the outright ageism. This negative and damaging rhetoric denigrating the right of older Tasmanians to have a say on this project and to have their needs considered equitably in our community is quite frankly offensive. That the Premier and the government at no point exhibited leadership and called out this elder abuse is damning. This is a government that claims to support an age-friendly Tasmania. Ministers from this government participate each year, as do I, in the Walk Against Elder Abuse on the 15th of June, which is World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. The core aim of this annual walk that we do together, Mr President, is to challenge ageism. Challenge ageism. Well, that's a massive fail then on the part of the Premier and his government when it comes to showing leadership on the distasteful rhetoric that cropped up and persisted around this project. Mr President, many people writing to me took offence and were hurt by the ageist denigration. For example, a fellow who wrote to me identified a common catch cry of stadium supporters being, "Old people don't want it and are selfishly depriving young people of opportunities." These arguments, this fellow wrote to me, are simplistic and wrong. To agitate the divisive and ageist position that is offensive has become the norm. Mr President, I understand why people feel excited about anything that may offer opportunities for our Tasmanian young people. But of course, we also have to accept and respect the fact that older Tasmanians also have a right to live in our community, also have needs in our community, and have a right to express themselves on any matters of public conversation and discourse that come through this place or through our general community. I hear loud and clear, Mr President, that many parents want their kids to have the same opportunities as in other states. That is understandable, and I absolutely agree with that. I also hear, though, from many parents that want their kids to have access to and be able to have pride in what makes our state unique and precious. The stadium development is often equated by proponents of it with aspiration for Tasmanian young people, as if it will provide some panacea, creating endless opportunities. Claims that are made that this stadium is a key way that we will be able to stop the exodus of young people from our state to pursue opportunities elsewhere is naively optimistic at best, Mr President. I understand why people want us to be able to solve that problem. They want us to be able to keep children in this state. But the reality is this stadium may have some small impact for some people, some young people in our community, but it is not a panacea, and it's utterly naive to think that it is. Certainly, having an AFL team in our state is a source of inspiration for a lot of young Tasmanians, and that is to be celebrated. It's encouraging kids to be involved with AFL football, to get excited about following our Tasmanian team, all of which are positive. Although, Mr President, just as more events at the stadium complex will be transferred, many of the events will be transferred from other venues, my guess is also that a lot of the kids that are flowing to AFL Auskick in this state are also cross-pollinating from other sports, and that's fine. I just don't know that it's necessarily new participation. But of course, the reality is AFL football is far from our most popular sport in this state. And the member for Mercy went to this in his contribution, and I appreciate that he did. We have a far higher participation rate in soccer and the world game, of course, of football, and a huge number of children who aspire to play it at an elite level but are stymied. These thousands of Tassie kids have been stymied for years due to a lack of community facilities, a lack of a stadium suitable for the rectangular pitch, and a lack of a well-supported elite-level state-based team, Mr President. This is a sport that has been crying out for support from our state government for years and years and years. And yet we've got a captain's pick by the Premier for AFL to get not just a bit of extra support, Mr President, but actually the whole kit and caboodle of support, pretty much. And that's incredibly sad. And I know the member for Mersey read out at least parts of the email that we received from Victoria Morton, which I also received and took great note of because I've met Victoria and we've discussed this issue, as I have discussed it with others from Football Tasmania, about the chronic lack of facilities and the underinvestment in football, that being soccer, in this state. I won't read more of Victoria's emailing because the member for Mersey has done that and people can find it on the parliamentary record in his contribution. But I do pay tribute to Victoria, who's been a tireless advocate for football in this state. And I seriously hope that what we pursue here with this stadium and the focus on AFL doesn't detract from what needs to happen in the soccer space in our state. Mr President, the project has been categorically shown to be detrimental to our state's finances. If we damage our already dire state finances further, we damage our ability to provide basic services to the Tasmanian community, and we are hurting Tasmanian young people. All this focus about what about the kids? Think about the inspiration. That's all fine, Mr President, but we also have to think about the practicality, and there are many, many children in this state who need our support, who need government services to be delivered effectively and funded effectively. And what we're actually doing here is approving something that will be detrimental to that will take it away from them. It's an absolute twist of logic to, on the one hand, booster the stadium concept with pictures of inspiration for children, while knowing full well that there will be teachers who will be getting sacked, that there will be nurses in our health system getting sacked, that we will see a detrimental impact on our public service which supports the Tasmanian community and Tasmanian young people as a result of this stadium. It's ironic, I think, to be talking about the fact that the stadium is apparently needed for inspiration and aspiration for young people at the same time that this government, just in recent months, has, for example, been cutting TAFE courses relating to other key Tasmanian areas of pursuit such as arts and design, and relating to practical courses like lab tech courses, which feed into our school system and benefit our children, Mr. President. What we're doing in cutting those TAFE courses, and the Minister admitted as much in budget estimates, is we're sending those young people to the mainland to study, Mr. President, because that's the only place they can go and do a face-to-face lab course, for example. It's not delivered face-to-face in Tasmania anymore as of next year. It's absolutely hypocritical of this government to use Tasmanian young people like political props as they booster this stadium project at the same time that they know full well that they are cutting the services and support that young people need. Now that's pure and simple wrong, Mr. President. We're picking winners here, and the winner is AFL football, but everyone else is going to suffer as a result, I think. Mr. President, I am intensely interested in the aspiration of young Tasmanians, having raised 3 of them myself. I am interested in the aspiration of all young Tasmanians, however. I'm interested in the aspiration of young Tasmanians, say, who play music. I'm interested in the aspiration of young Tasmanians who are artists. I'm interested in the aspirations of young Tasmanians who want to be scientists. I'm interested in the aspiration of young Tasmanians who are writers. I'm interested in the aspiration of young Tasmanians who want to be academics. I'm interested in the aspiration of young Tasmanians who want to pursue careers in a whole range of areas that they don't have available to them here at the moment, or are diminishing in our state because of choices made by this government literally as we speak. Elite sport, Mr. President, is a very, very small margin of aspiration for Tasmanian young people. I don't dismiss it. I celebrate it just as much as those others, but it is one small margin. And what we should be doing is not preferring it over everything else to the detriment of everything else. In a very fundamental way, we are underfunding our education system if we know that the education system is crying out for more government support, and we turn around and we build a stadium that's going to take money from that self-same education system down the track, because we will be having to pay a massive interest bill that we will have to borrow for or cut services to fund. And then we're condemning Tasmanian children and young people to poorer outcomes. This narrative about aspiration connected to the stadium is another way that the Premier and his government is driving unnecessary division within our community. They're weaponising it, Mr. President. It's political weaponisation, pure and simple. It's ageist, it's pitting older people against younger people, and it's false. To suggest that anybody who's against the stadium is somehow against the aspiration and opportunity of Tasmanian children and young people is ridiculous, and it's offensive. I know plenty of Tasmanian young people who are not in favour of this stadium, who do not see it as a priority for our state, who have a multitude of aspirations for our state and for themselves here that will be detrimentally impacted by the building of this stadium. What we are seeing here is a government that utterly failed to follow good process, responsible prioritisation of public funding, effective planning to address community need, and is now using ageist emotional blackmail as they try to bluff and bully their way out of it with their cargo cult project. Mr. President, my hope for young Tasmanians is that they come to learn about how unique and utterly special our state is and our capital city of Hobart is. My fear now that I see where this vote will fall is that in times to come, when appalling desecration of the unique heritage of our beautiful city has been perpetrated by us with this massive bulk of a mediocre stadium complex, our children, then grown to adults and seniors, will shake their heads and say, "How could you have let such a terrible thing happen?" They'll shake their head, Mr. President. And what answer will we have to give them? The best future for our capital city of Hobart is not to try to replicate all the bells and whistles that you'll find in a big mainland city, capital city, Mr. President. It's to become the best version of our unique self. The best future for our young people is in protecting and cherishing and valuing exactly what makes Tasmania and Hobart unique. That will be what draws people here and keeps people here, not a stadium, Mr. President. People are on a pathway to disappointment with that one. All the things about our state that young Tasmanians can learn to be proud of relate to our uniqueness, and that's exactly what this stadium is going to damage irrevocably if we go forward with it. Mr. President, unsurprisingly, we have heard a considerable amount said, including in this debate, regarding concerns about community division and the need to be respectful for each other and different views. It's in that context that I wish to raise the use of language such as anti and anti-everything brigade and phraseology of similar ilk, because we've heard a lot of it across the time of this public conversation. I use that term loosely, actually. The constant use and labelling of alternative visions by a false binary of a positive and a negative is to be divisive in and of itself. Those objecting to either this stadium or other proposals are doing so because they are for something, Mr. President. They are for something. Just as the Macquarie Point Community Association, back then in 1968, had an alternative vision to the planned demolition of our iconic Salamanca Place warehouses, which were scheduled for demolition to be replaced by office skyrises. They were called, Mr. President, the naysayers, the anti-everything brigade too, those Battery Point heroes. They were called the anti-everything brigade. But you know what they were for, Mr. President? They weren't anti-everything. They were very much for protecting our heritage, our precious heritage of Salamanca, which is now something we celebrate over almost everything else in our city. The economic value of that Salamanca precinct to us is now immeasurable, particularly to local businesses and to our broader economy. It's one of our most visited sites by tourists. It is an iconic picture of Hobart, that view up the market with the mountain behind, Kununyi looking resplendent behind. It is absolutely the essence of our city. And you know who protected it, Mr. President? The Anti-Everything Brigade, because they were for something, regardless of the names that people called them, regardless of the derision that was heaped on their heads. They were for something, and that is something that we value now, that we thank them for when we look back. In this instance, Mr. President, I hope never to hear any other leaders in this state use that kind of pejorative language in relation to their fellow citizens and the people that they purport to lead. How dare they? Every single person who has written to us about this project in opposition to it has been incredibly articulate about what concerns them about it. And in so many cases, they are identifying things that they are for because they're worried that this will diminish them or destroy those things. Mr. President, every single person who may have a view that this project shouldn't go ahead, by the way, they share that view with the independent experts who advise us on it. But they have that view because they are for something. And Mr President, I think they are 4 things that are incredibly important to our city and to our state and to our sense of identity and to our future. So I thank them for their advocacy so far, and I suspect what may be their future advocacy on this. In this instance, Mr President, the positive alternative visions that we could have for the important sense of place in our city home to be restored or prioritised for their open public space that is available there at Mac Point and has had plans made about it. And we've had such things as plans for social housing, plans for an Aboriginal Reconciliation Art Park, plans for an interpretation centre, all sorts of wonderful suggestions. All these alternative visions are also for investment and for jobs and for building our economy. They're for building the character of our city and complementing it. They're for building the cultural life of our city. It's for retaining positive and culturally important sightlines for our cenotaph, for investing in and promoting our world-acclaimed TSO and making sure we don't interrupt the wonderful world-class trajectory that they are on. It's worth pointing out, Mr President, that this is something that I fear we are now habitually defaulting to in this state, pejorative name-calling. And again, it has terrible echoes of Trumpism, to be honest. He's quite masterful at calling his opponents names and in doing that trying to undermine their credibility and in fact their humanity. And that's what happens here, particularly when political leaders start throwing around pejorative names in relation to their fellow citizens, Mr President, in relation to their fellow Tasmanians. When you do that, not only is it hurtful, not only is it patently just wrong, it also undermines the humanity of our fellow Tasmanians and citizens. Mr President, I really hope one day we will see a pivot and a turning away from such base populist political tactics. Mr President, there's been some discussion about the role of Parliament in relation to this project and where we are now. And I do just note that we had a good briefing last week from Planning Matters Alliance of Tasmania, PMAT, who provided us with some good notes to think about in relation to our role. They were respectfully reminding us, particularly they were reminding people in this place with a local government background, that whether or not we approve or reject the stadium order, we are essentially acting as planning authorities. I know there's some nuance to that, but that's what it is. But there are some differences too in us doing that in this place. They pointed out that in terms of the decision we make here, unlike planning authorities elsewhere in the normal planning system, we have virtually then no oversight at all. There's no merits review to this decision. The order cannot be appealed to TASCAT on planning grounds to look at the planning merits of the stadium. They put it to us, their understanding was that Section 18 of the State's Policies and Projects Act alters the normal appeal rights of a person in the community that they might have to make a legal challenge to this order or conditions, and appears to remove judicial review. So as a result, Mr President, what they pointed us to was there being significant hurdles to any sort of review or oversight of the Tasmanian Supreme Court. And that's actually fundamentally thwarting a really basic concept that we have in our rule of law, that a decision can be appealable, particularly on, say, legal grounds, or if not merits as well. And particularly in our planning system, any other method provides for that. So I appreciated them drawing that to our attention, and it is a serious concern. This is a binding and final decision that we're making here on this order. There's no second chance on it, Mr President. we've had some new information come to us today as part of this debate, and it will take more time to absorb that and understand the details of it. Mr. President, I will just make a couple of comments in my contribution here based on what has been sort of said and made available, that they'll be fairly cursory. And I must also address some of the promises made by the government, it would appear, to certain members that we've only just been advised about. At the outset, I have to say the nature of those negotiations and 11th hour announcements feels contrary to the ethos of full informed debate, but no matter what I think of the individual commitments, the last minute insertion into debate clearly puts us all at a disadvantage. We're not able to consider those things or be part of those discussions and outcomes. But I have tried to give a little bit of consideration so I can add in some comments here on a range of those apparent undertakings. So, Mr. President, to start with, the recent undertakings announced today by the Honourable Member for Elwick intended to strengthen protections and safeguards around the stadium. While I understand the inclination to attempt to insert safeguards, and I think that's a natural one and a positive one, I cannot share confidence that these undertakings will provide meaningful mitigation of serious and outstanding matters of concern on this stadium project. It's also important to note we have not, and the community has not, been provided with an opportunity or time to test whether or how any of these announced commitments will have any bearing on matters raised by the independent expert TPC panel or other advice received. Personally, Mr. President, I cannot see how anything cobbled together at such a late date and in such a pressure cooker circumstance could ameliorate the serious unresolved matters of concern here. But, Mr. President, I do want to specifically address the matter of a fixed cost cap. First point to make on that is we have heard promises of not a red cent more before, of course. So a fixed cost cap, I'm afraid, falls into the category of déjà vu. I'm sure it will stay in place until it isn't, Mr. President. The second point to make, to put bluntly, is that this is not good news, in my opinion. In fact, I'm not surprised that the government was quick to sign up to it. Fixing the cost guarantees a substandard venue with substandard facilities, I believe. We know that the construction associated costs will rise. Already just this week we've been discovering the basic element of concrete quality sand is depleting the south. What's the law of supply and demand, Mr. President? When a desired product is rare and becomes more difficult to get, the value and the price escalates. We don't have a finalised design of the venue, the roof is still being sorted out, costs will rise. So what happens then when we've capped the amount at $875 million from the state and we can't... Sorry,
through you, Mr. President.
Yes. Let me...
No guarantee.
Yes, that's right, exactly. So what happens when the capped amount of $875 million from the state can't stretch to cover inevitable increased construction design, contamination remedial costs, all the other areas identified as likely to fluctuate? I'll tell you what happens, Mr. President. Corners are cut, designs are downgraded, quality drops. We'll be told the lovely glossy designs in the proponents' promotional materials were aspirations, Madam Deputy President. And now we have to be realistic, of course, and we'll have to cut our cloth to fit our whatever. And we can hear the smug government statement. By the way, the government promised a cost cap, so we can't afford to deliver the design we promised. We'll just have to accept the substandard venue and facilities. This is a lose-lose provision for Tasmania and Tasmanians, Madam Deputy President. It gives cover to the government, who has repeatedly breached our trust in the past. Either the government sticks to the cap and delivers a substandard venue with substandard facilities, a lose for the community, or because it was impractical, the government breaks the promise and increases expenditure and the debt associated with the project, and that's a lose for the community too. We have no control over the will or capacity of other identified co-funding contributors. Yes, we could ask them to increase their contributions, but why would they? I'm sorry, Madam Deputy President, but all those broken promises have consumed any political capital that this government may have on this issue. We no longer trust such promises of cost caps on the state expenditure. A new independent probity advisor sounds good on the surface, as does a design, quality and integrity review panel. More independent experts, Madam Deputy President. More independent experts for the government to thank and then ignore. Without an accompanying signed commitment that any findings and recommendations by such probity advisors or review panels will report to Parliament, or at least table findings and reports to the full Parliament, not just to PAC, and crucially that any findings or recommendations made by these new independent advisors are to be implemented verbatim by the government, then I'm sorry. It's just not going to cut it. The government has squandered political capital and public trust, which means for many, including myself, all this indicates is that we need to clear some more space on the shelf next to all the other independent expert reports that this government has ignored. Perhaps we can put it right next to the TPC IAR. Madam Deputy President, we were told earlier today that the responsibility is all now on the government to meet these latest conditions sprung on us today via those last-minute deals, just as the government honoured previous deals, we will recall, with the JLN or with the former Liberal MPs turned crossbenchers. How did the government, having all the responsibility but no shame, work out for them? I'm sorry, but no, Madam Deputy President. Too much is on the line to now be expected to believe these malignant spots have changed on this leopard. Yes, the ultimate responsibility will potentially be future elections, but much damage can be done and opportunity squandered in the meantime. Moving on, I welcome and appreciate the recognition that Tasmanians with genuine, deep-seated concerns about this project and its potential ramifications have the right to still raise their voices in objection and to support their alternate vision for the site. Absolutely, I wish to reiterate that recognition. It should never even have been a question, in fact, that we needed to assert that. But no matter the vote in this place, the community will continue to campaign, as is their democratic right, to do so peacefully with or without our endorsement. What I didn't hear was whether any guarantee was provided by the government to also respect any ongoing community campaigns along the rest of this project's journey, particularly that should include peaceful protest. Too often, we have seen this Parliament used to curtail our democratic rights to peaceful protest, and I'm putting on the record here and now that all protestations of respecting everyone's views on this matter will be rendered null and void should there be any future move by this or future governments to lock out Tasmanians from the publicly owned public space and public waterways around the project and precinct. I put on the record now, Madam Deputy President, there must be no forestry light gazetted exclusion zones in relation to this project. I'm also deeply uncomfortable with the potential outsourcing of our responsibility as elected representatives. It shouldn't be up to the concerned community members to have to continue restating their concerns. They have been doing that for over 2 years now. It's probably 3 actually, Madam Deputy President. And in many instances, concerns voiced in 2022 and 2023 have been validated over the years, such as cost blowouts, and in other areas of concerns we've heard from the independent TPC, those concerns cannot be ameliorated. But don't worry, if you hold those concerns about good governance and future budget crises, you just keep on raising them. Go on, you just keep on exercising a democratic right. But that is shirking our responsibility, I believe, Madam Deputy President. If we hold those concerns, any concerns that such ramifications may eventuate, that means that we should be acting now. We have a responsibility and an absolute duty to be brutally upfront with these concerned community members. We are encouraging to keep campaigning for a better outcome. There will not be, however, another opportunity to put the brakes on this project. Let me repeat that, Madam Deputy President. This vote on this order is the last opportunity to put the brakes on and put a stop to this. I've heard mention of appropriation bills. Yes, they may bring another appropriation bill for costs as they rise, and they should be scrutinised thoroughly, no matter what else is on the political horizon. But what happens if the appropriation bills do not deliver as promised? What do members intend to do then? If we scrutinise those bills and we don't like them, have we forgotten already that we went to an early election this year because the budget was blocked? How many times do you think the community will tolerate that disruption, and why should they? That should be the mechanism of last resort, not a method of policy finalisation or correction. There is no other parliamentary stop sign on this project, Madam Deputy President. This is it. This vote is the stop sign before the cliff. I cannot put it any more clearly than that. There'll be nothing to be done, Madam Deputy President, if they bring another appropriation bill for some more funding for this project. If any member in here thinks that's not a good idea or has second thoughts about the way they voted this time around, there'll be nothing they can do about it at that point. Nothing, except complain a bit. I have not had time to consider in detail, Madam Deputy President, the undertakings the government has made to the member for Huon, but I do wish to discuss briefly in context of the need for intergenerationally sound and equitable budget repair, the undertaking by the government to commission an independent assessor of budget repair progress 3 months after the delivery of annual budgets. This again limits scrutiny to the end of the budgetary process, and it leaves the government of the day to decide whether they can wear a positive, a poor or a mixed report card. And we know how this government is going to treat report cards from an independent expert who's making comment, probably judgmental comment, on their work. They're just going to say, let's pick one of three. They're biased, they're wrong, it's their opinion, we'll just put it on the shelf. But I want to remind members of the numerous calls I've made in this place for Tasmanians to have their say and have their immediate and long-term circumstances expertly considered in the development of budget repair strategies. An independent expert panel to report to Parliament to undertake thorough examination of our fiscal situation and make recommendations to Parliament on how to get back on short-term, immediate and long-term fiscally sound tracks. But, and this is the important consideration, Madam Deputy President, but within clear economic, social, cultural and environmental sustainability parameters. Such a mechanism could be built around unity, around a fiscally sound repair strategy while avoiding the slash and burn, the austerity budgets driven by political ideology that we are all now looking ahead and fearing. Madam Deputy President, I know other members have done this and I want to do it too because I feel it's respectful. It does extend my contribution, but so be it, quite frankly. This is a contribution that warrants being thorough, that warrants being accountable to the community. People have worked and made efforts for years on this topic, for years. And I want to honour that and acknowledge it. I've got a very tiny selection of things that I've been hearing. Many of us have shared the vast volume of correspondence we've received, and it has been very difficult to try and keep up with it. I've tried really hard and did quite well until quite recently. But I also pay tribute to the assistance and the help from Kath, my staff member, but also volunteers who've been helping in my office, and also my family who've been very supportive with that too. So it's really, really tricky to try to have to explain to your kids, no, I can't do that now. I'm just got to try and answer some more emails before I go to bed. So I appreciate the enormous effort taken by so many Tasmanians from all around the state to communicate with us about their views on this stadium, whatever those views were. So many of them were cogent, were well researched, were articulately expressed, were passionate, were well argued. Clearly this took people time and effort. And it was because they cared. It's because they were for something, Madam Deputy President. It's because they weren't an anti-everything brigade. They were a thoughtful, articulate, passionate advocate for something. Either way. So something I heard, and I'm just going to use first names attached to some of these comments because I don't think it in any way necessarily identifies people. Investing in This is a quote. Investing in a large-scale stadium under current circumstances raises concerns about the long-term financial sustainability and potential debt that would impact our community. Rather than prioritising this stadium project, I believe our focus should shift towards improving infrastructure, public services and community resources that genuinely benefit all Tasmanians. Well said, Robert. That was so pithy. What a lovely little summation. Here's another really short comment from Christopher. I'm so tired and disappointed by the political and corporate game playing and propaganda. Yep, I shared that sentiment with Christopher. Here's one from Rod. Tasmania deserves its own AFL team without having to surrender its fiscal sovereignty or compromise democratic integrity. The state should not be forced into unprecedented expenditure as the price of recognition, nor should policy be shaped in the shadows of private meetings and corporate influence. Well said, Rod. And I heard from Diane. She said this, it is dividing households, workplaces and families as well. I've been around a while and have never been so disillusioned with our leaders. A die-hard Liberal voter all my life until this business. And then I heard from Eleanor. It would be tragic if on the 200th anniversary of the separation of Van Diemen's Land from Mother Colony New South Wales, the 3rd of December 1825, the Legislative Council voted to destroy Hobart's waterfront and the human-scale history it embodies. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I'm just so sorry. Another one. I'm a resident of the Nelson electorate and I wish to communicate to you my personal disappointment with the Liberal government's decision to proceed with this stadium folly. As a parent of teenage children, I feel it's our obligation to look after or even improve our magnificent state. The concept that we should burden our children with this massive debt would be a gross misuse of our stewardship responsibilities. Another one here from Peter. It's quite a thoughtful one, it's a bit longer. He says, I'm writing to urge you to vote against the proposed stadium at Macquarie Point. I'll keep this short, he says. While I appreciate the fervour and passion of supporters for the stadium, in its present form at least it falls well short on every discernible level. It will cost more than the state can afford. It is in the wrong place. After analysis and due process, the people of Tasmania should say where a stadium should be sited, not a Victorian football club. Education, health and housing in our state are fundamental needs. A stadium at Macquarie Point is not. The experts have warned us that the proposed stadium is not an economically viable proposition, and to pursue it would put the state of Tasmania under further financial stress. With Moody's and S&P both downgrading Tasmania's credit rating of late, to proceed would be financially irresponsible, potentially disastrous. The planning authorities have not supported the proposal, and I will not reiterate their findings here, as I'm sure you're well aware of their expert opinion. Please let cooler and wiser heads prevail and save Tasmania from this monumental blunder. I would be most surprised if more viable alternatives for a stadium were not available in the future. I agree, Peter. I think you're absolutely spot on, and I'm sorry about that. I'm right, another one here. Yeah, this is quite a thoughtful one from Rob. I'm writing in regard to the Macquarie Point Stadium. I'm urging you to vote against the stadium. My father and grandfather were both returned soldiers. The cenotaph was located and designed to facilitate a line of sight across southern Tasmania to honour the fallen. The stadium will destroy this. I regard it as a desecration. This is why the RSL objects with the support of their members. The stadium is too big and will dominate Hobart's historical vistas. Some areas in North Hobart will only be able to see the stadium, not the river. I'm upset that the government uses artists' impressions which do not show the true height of the stadium. Tourists come to Hobart for its charm and character. Please do not destroy this. Macquarie Point location is an opportunity to create something that adds to Hobart for everyone, a space that can be used 365 days a year. My 96-year-old mother, who passed recently, could not even get an ambulance when she needed one, and her stay in the RHH was not an enjoyable experience, even though the staff were wonderful. It's an old building now with many problems and will need replacing soon. I worry how services will diminish once taxpayers have a huge financial burden associated with the stadium. Tasman Bridge will need replacing soon as well. There's a lot of expenditure coming up, and now is not the time for a stadium debt. Tasmania's debt is already spiralling out of control. We're already seeing how badly the government has managed the new ferries. How can they be trusted with the stadium? Every expert the government has employed has advised the stadium will lose money. Even the POS rejected the stadium. Why do we have experts paid by taxpayers if government ignores their advice? I'm the biggest AFL supporter, but the stadium makes no sense. Taxpayers will be paying this off for generations and lose so much of Hobart's charm. The cenotaph will be desecrated and services will diminish even further. Thank you for taking the time to read this, and I urge you to vote no to the stadium. People are so articulate and precise with expressing their concerns, Madam Deputy President. I think I was going to read one that somebody else has read out already, so I'll skip over that one. But I will read this one. It's from Jameson. It says, I'm beginning to grieve for my city as I sense an inevitability for the stadium, i.e. its approval. Maybe in the future, as the new structure takes form, others, on seeing its mammoth size and its effect on the character of this extraordinary city, will share some of my regret. The proposed stadium will be quite simply in the wrong place, a huge carbuncle on the face of the city. I've lived all my adult life in this city. I've helped to shape it, not always perfectly, through my profession. I've visited striking architectural designs around the world and formally adjudicated on some of this country's notable buildings, including Melbourne's Federation Square and the Great Southern Stand at the MCG, by the way. I suppose you could say I'm an ex-expert, though that doesn't seem to carry any weight in this case. The pro-stadium lobby has had an easy sell, made easy by our collective love of footy and our real desire to see a Tassie team in the big league, made easier still by the shameless and unprofessional one-sided reporting of Hobart's newspaper, but that's another story. The anti-argument is a bit more nuanced, isn't it? Calling for a bit less cheer squad emotion and a bit more calm consideration. Such a thoughtful contribution. And claims about, Madam Deputy President, claims about universal support for this project from Tasmanian young people, which are often basically implied that everybody who's young must be in support of this. It's not the case. There's more support amongst young people proportionally than amongst some older demographics, but it's not everyone by any means. I've been hearing lots of views from young Tasmanians, including it might have been this morning, it might have been last night, I can't quite remember, a 15-year-old student from Woodbridge who wrote to me and laid out beautifully with subheadings and dot points across different areas the reasons that he wasn't in favour of the stadium. And he did that so successfully and articulately, and I really appreciated hearing it. It reminded me, I think, of something that maybe one of my kids would write if they felt strongly about something and were wanting to reach out to their local representative. So, Madam Deputy President, I just certainly wanted to share some of those contributions from members of the community who have been contacting us. I think it's only right, as part of this public record of this debate on this enormously consequential project, that we make sure voices are heard, and I'm just so sorry that the thousands that we receive can't be well represented necessarily by these snippets. Madam Deputy President, this has been a long contribution, but we're creating a public record of our consideration of this matter, and this is how we are accountable to the Tasmanian people. There are many aspects of this project worthy of consideration that I haven't talked about at all and won't have time to. Environmental issues, transport issues, especially buses, regional impacts and much more. Some of those matters have been covered well by other members, and I appreciate where they have been. Madam Deputy President, I also want to take a minute to highlight the bright spot in this, the outpouring of engagement that we just talked about from Tasmanian people. I want to pay tribute to people who wrote and who contacted us. I also want to take this opportunity to reiterate that consideration of everybody who's been so supportive. So many of the communications with us included words of kindness and support, compassion for the position that we were in, and encouragement. And that was incredibly important to read throughout this time. So, Madam Deputy President, I spoke earlier about how divisive the issue has been, as have other members, and I hope I'm wrong, but I fear that the division which has rent the community on this, divided families and split political parties even over the last 2 years, will continue. I fear it will. Despite the Premier desperately trying to tell himself otherwise, the Parliament's vote on this matter will not be an end to it. Healing requires trust and, importantly, hope. Hope that things will improve. For many, it's hard to see that occurring after the contemptuous treatment of the community over the last 2 years on this matter. Where are the guarantees that this bullish and bullying behaviour, characterised over the past few years by secret backroom deals and information only being released when it's like pulling teeth, how are we to trust that that will change? And it didn't need to be this way, Madam Deputy President. So many times that's been said. It's been said before, and I think actually it might be the eventual epitaph of this great white elephant that we're contemplating. It didn't have to be this way. The team is a unifier, but it has been undermined and tainted. There has been a manifest failure of the government to show leadership, to stand up for a unified community and to the AFL. When I moved a motion in this place requesting the Premier to seek to renegotiate with the AFL, it was defeated on the floor, with honourable members arguing we should allow the TPC to complete its job, and that was proper process and the approach to take. Well, the TPC did complete its job. It did its job very well. It gave us a very clear instruction in the form of its recommendation. Circumstances aligned and courtesy of the early election, they actually were allowed to complete that job, thank goodness. And its findings mean that the AFL, if they were truly respectful of Tasmania and Tasmanians, should have come, at the release of that report, the AFL should have come knocking on our door here to seeking to renegotiate an alternative stadium site, given that we so clearly had expert advice that it was entirely detrimental to us to pursue this stadium. We certainly had other options that could have been explored. Imagine the respect that would have earned the AFL if they had done something as gracious as that. Imagine the unification and the de-escalation of public discord that could have been fostered. It did not have to be this way, Mr. President. Mr. President, you'll be pleased to know it's time to sum up. Summing up takes a little bit of time, but it's time to sum up. Instead of focusing on the genuine and substantial challenges faced by our state, many of them manifestly worsened in the last 11 years under their watch, the Premier and his government has focused instead on one unaffordable, ill-sited and inevitably damaging stadium. We don't yet know exactly how unaffordable the project will be, Mr. President, because there hasn't, until today, been a cap on costs. However, we may have a cap in place, perhaps until it's convenient for there not to be. And just look at what's happened so far. We saw it was first $715 million, then it was $945 million. It's conveniently, just after the assessment by the TPC, jumped up to the $1.13 billion that we have now. Do I hear a higher bid, Mr. President? And not an eyelid of the government has blinked once at any of those escalations. There's been no shame whatsoever from the government that they just keep on pushing that price up. There's no reason to believe it won't keep on rising. It will be a runaway train, and after this week, if it proceeds, and it looks like it will, there will be no stopping the continual escalation, because week after week there'll never be another moment in time where a decision-making body has the opportunity to say stop. There's nobody who's going to be able to say that's too much, that's too far. The only way we could do that in this place is if we blocked an appropriation bill, Mr. President, and sent the state to an election, basically. That's not going to happen, or it shouldn't happen. If it's a yes this week, and it looks like it is, we are either signing a blank cheque or we're dooming the project to mediocrity. through cost constraint. It's a lose-lose situation on this project, Mr President. It can't come out ahead for us. Not only that, Mr President, we've been warned by experts in this game that political expediency will have us over a barrel throughout this whole process. Political expediency will lead to lack of transparency, to inevitable errors and to cost blowouts. That has been mapped out really clearly for us by experts who have no skin in the game but multitudes of experience. The lesson is clear. Government clients under political pressure on projects such as this are vulnerable, particularly to variation on contracts with builders and inexorable escalating costs. Mr President, I'm highly concerned that the near religious fervour that has been whipped up by the government to try to push this stadium through, I'm concerned it's so exceedingly misleading that when this project does emerge, we will come crashing down to earth and people will wake up from that fever dream and wonder how the heck we ended up with a third-rate, double the cost, mostly unused, massive monolithic edifice desecrating the once unique and beautiful Hobart Waterfront Heritage Precinct. On all evidence, and as warned by many of the independent experts we've heard from who are not acting as boosters for the government project, we are likely to see many of the following, and I'm going to run through a little list here of things we could quite likely be seeing as we go forward from today. Cost pressures forcing down quality. We're likely to already be seeing that occur with the design of the project. For example, where we saw lovely pretty paving in initial images, I'm sure that that's now defaulted to asphalt. In the latest plans, that seemed to be the case in what was presented to the TPC. We'll see attractive features that have been lauded in the glossy images presented in the media to date being cut and continuing to be cut and compromised as costs rise. Lovely landscaped environs we've seen pictured around the stadium will fall victim to safety requirements for pedestrian movement and evacuation and become plain open plan asphalt. There'll be no attractive and comfortable places for families and children to gather to use and enjoy the site outside of specific events inside. The environment will be too windy, too harsh, too uncomfortable, too unpleasant all round, Mr President. We will know, Mr President, will we know, Mr President, that we are in a special Tasmanian space at this venue and precinct because there are celebrations of our environment, our history, our community story built into the very fabric of the venue? I predict no. I predict those things will be the first things to go when costs get squeezed. Whatever the best intentions there were at the outset, I bet by now we are already seeing that crumble as the cost squeeze sets in because the Premier said not 1 red cent more. And now he's apparently signed up to a cost cap for his own political expediency and not for the benefit of what will be a far from iconic project. Concrete everywhere, that's my prediction, Mr President, except maybe in the very special places inside for the special people. I'm sure those will remain very luxurious and beautifully finished. But for the rest of us, it will be concrete and nothing to connect us to Tasmanian uniqueness or the Tasmanian story. Not a red cent more dooms us to bland mediocrity, Mr President, and by the time that's clear, it will be too late. It will be too horrifyingly tragic to say, I told you so at that point. But by then we will have wrecked our beautiful capital city, our priceless heritage, our waterfront, our sacred nationally significant cenotaph, all while cribbing money away year after year from our essential services to pay the ever-increasing interest debt. Mr President, the Premier promised a government with heart. Now he has guaranteed that whatever way the vote went today, there will be multitudes of Tasmanian broken hearts. A yes vote is an end to precious things about our capital city which once gone can never be recovered. A no vote, if it had gone through, there would have been countless other ways we could have looked to invest in infrastructure to deliver our jobs and growth at a much better rate of return to the public finances. If the vote was no, the Premier still had the opportunity to be a champion for the team and to go into bat for Tasmania, who would have been devastated at the idea of the team ripped away, but we could have all had his back on that. And of course the options were still there. We could have had a true Team Tasmania effort. Mr. President, this decision today will tell us a lot about who we are. Are we willing here to approve and reward this disparagement and dismissal of independent experts who have provided evidence-based factual information and recommendations? Are we willing here to approve this precedent-setting abandonment of good governance, accountability and integrity in decision-making? Are we here willing to accept this step change into post-truth misleading of the public and blatant BS boosterism as the new normal for our political debates? Are we willing here, in the face of what we all know to be a dire financial situation for our state, to endorse a project which, when you block out all the noise outside, we in here well know does not offer a solution, a way out, but rather a compounding of our problem? Are we willing, Mr. President? What will that tell us about ourselves, I wonder? Mr. President, I hope instead, for our own sense of self-worth and integrity, that we are willing to stand up for our state, for the fabric of our democracy, for the inviolability of our historic capital city. I had hoped, Mr. President, that this would be where we would draw a line in the sand and say, enough. We require a higher standard, not a lower one. We require a higher standard of behaviour, of governance, of aspiration and of respect for the Tasmanian people. The only way for us to require that, Mr. President, would be to have voted no on this order. So, Mr. President, that is what I will be doing.